Right, people are joining. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Um, Welcome everybody to our session number 33. There's only a few people. There's Muhammad Rahal coming. We are. Others are joining. Here we are in session number 33 on the very last chapter of our slow reading of the Fusus al-Hikam. Let's see who else is showing up. Not many people today. All right. Let's get cracking. If there's nobody else showing up, let's just get into the reading because it's not a long reading anyway. So the wisdom of singularity, al-Hikmat al-Fardiyah, in the word of Muhammad, fi kalima Muhammadiyah. His is the wisdom of singularity because he is the most perfect creation of this humankind, for which reason the whole affair of creation begins and ends with him. He was a prophet when Adam was still between water and clay, and he is by his elemental makeup the seal of the prophets, first of the three singular ones, since all other singulars derive from it. He was the clearest of evidence for his Lord, having been given the totality of the divine words, the Jawami al-Kalam, which are those things named by Adam, so that he was the closest of clues to his own triplicity, he being himself a clue to himself. Since then, his reality was marked by primal singularity and his makeup by triplicity. He said concerning love, which is the origin of all existent being, three things have been made beloved to me in this world of yours because of the triplicity inherent in it. Then he mentioned women and perfume and added that he found solace in prayer. He begins by mentioning women and leaves prayer until last because in the manifestation of her essence, woman is part of man. Now, man's knowledge of himself comes before his knowledge of his Lord, the latter being the result of the former, according to his saying, whoso knows himself knows his Lord. Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbih. From this, one may understand either that one is not able to know and attain, which is one meaning, or that gnosis is possible. According to the first interpretation, one can know oneself and cannot therefore know one's Lord, while according to the second, one may know oneself and therefore one's Lord. Although Muhammad was the most obvious evidence of his Lord, every part of the cosmos is a clue to its origin, which is its Lord. So understand. Women were made beloved to him, and he had great affection for them because the whole always is drawn towards its part. Now, let me just stop here and first of all say that Ibn Arabi is actually playing a dissimulating game because what he's saying about the status of women in this first part of the chapter of the Singularity of Muhammad is actually the opposite of several significant things that he says about women in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Number one, in which he says that women can be among the aktab, the poles of the age, and that, all the ranks, even implying that even the rank of prophecy may have been open to women at some point in the past. So this is sort of a language game that Ibn Arabi is playing, and we should not take this literally, even though some of his commentators seem to take this little tidbit very literally sometimes when they're unpacking it. I think that the intention of Ibn Arabi is something completely different. He's not literally talking about gender. He's talking about the relationship between the intellect and the soul, or the aql and the nafs. This is really what he's trying to put his finger on, and he's kind of using in a elusive way the language of gender, of male, female to that end. But this is not really his intention. And when you get to actually read the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, this becomes very evident. But here, it's extremely obscure. This, he explains, is coming from the reality in his saying regarding the elemental human makeup, and I breathe into him of my spirit. God describes himself as having a deep longing for contact with man when he says to those who long for him, "O David, I long for them even more." That is a special meeting, he says, or encounter. He says further in a saying on the Antichrist, none of you will see his Lord until he dies. Indeed, it is hardly surprising that one God so described should be longed for. Thus God longs for those favored ones, seeing them and wishing that they could see him, although their state does not permit it. It is like his saying, we will test them until we know, although he knows them well. Thus, he longs for them because of his special quality, which cannot be realized except after death, while their longing for him is kept fresh by it. As he says in the saying of hesitation, I do not hesitate in what I do as much as in taking the soul of my faithful servant. He hates death as much as I hate to hurt him, but he must see me. He gives him glad tidings instead of telling him that he must die, lest he become distressed at the mention of death, although he may not meet God until after death, as he said. None of you will see his Lord until he dies. He says he must meet me, the longing for God being because of this attribution. The beloved longs to see me, and I long even more to see him. The hearts beat fast, but destiny bars the way. I groan in complaint, and so does he. Since he has explained that he breathed into man of his spirit, he is yearning in reality for himself. Consider then how, because of his spirit, his creation is in his own image. Since man's makeup is composed of the four elements or humors in his body, air, fire, water, and earth, his breathing produces a burning because of the moisture in the body. Thus, by his makeup, man's spirit is a fire, because of which God spoke to Moses in the form of fire, in which he put what he wished for. And this is just, he is finishing a thought that he ended the last chapter with. Where his makeup purely natural, his spirit would be of light. It is called blowing, nafaka, because it comes from the breath of the merciful, and it is by this breath, which is the blowing, that his essence is manifest. It is according to the eternal predisposition of the one blown into that the flaring up is fire and not light, the breath of the merciful being deeply implicit in that by which man is man. Then God drew forth from him a being in his own image, called woman, because she appears in his own image. The man feels a deep longing for her as something yearns for itself, while she longing for him as one longs for that place to which one belongs. Again, let me stop here. Now read this not as a gender, as a commentary on the reality of material gender. This is talking very explicitly now about how the relationship of the universal intellect with the universal soul, which contains the universal nature, occurs, right? So the universal nature longs for its principle, which is the universal intellect, the aql al-adwal, which is synonymous with the universal will. Thus, women, or universal nature, were made beloved to him, for God loves that which he has created in his own image, and to which he has made his angels prostrate, in spite of their greater power, rank, and lofty nature. From that stemmed the affinity between God and man, and the divine image is the greatest, most glorious, and perfect example of affinity. That is because it is a syzygy that polarizes the being of the reality, just as woman, or universal nature or soul, by her coming into being, polarizes humanity, making of it a syzygy. This is a very significant statement when read very, in this kind of a nuanced way, where woman is universal nature, right? So now we begin to understand this two-in-one relationship in the relationship of the universal nature that constitutes all the material life, everything, and its own principle. Thus we have a ternary, God, man, and woman, or God, universal intellect, and universal nature or soul. The man yearning for his Lord, who is its origin, as woman yearns for man, the intellect. His Lord made woman dear to him, just as God loves that which is in his own image. Love arises only for that from which one has one's being, so that man loves that from which he has his being, which is the reality, which is why he says, we're made beloved to me, and not I love directly from himself. His love is for his Lord, in whose image he is. This being so, even as regards his love for his wife, since he loves her through God's love for him, after the divine manner. When a man loves a woman, he seeks union with her. That is to say, the most complete union possible in love. And there is in the elemental sphere no greater union than that between the sexes. Now, look at that as the union, the yearning of the universal intellect, or the universal will for the universal soul, right? So this, when you transpose, when you take, this material symbolism to its higher plane, this starts to give us a mechanics of the causality that Ibn Arabi is trying to show us about the greater scheme of things, what this universal being, the cone, actually really is, right? In this Sizing. It is precisely because such desire pervades all his parts that man is commanded to perform the major ablution. Thus, the purification is total, just as his annihilation in her was total at the moment of consummation. Very interesting. This becomes extremely alchemical now, where the intellect, the prime agent of all things, experiences annihilation in its own production of the universal nature, right? God is jealous of his servant that he should find pleasure in any but him, so he purifies him by the ablution so that he might once again behold in the one in whom he was annihilated, since it is none other than he whom he sees in her. When man contemplates the reality in woman, he beholds him in a passive aspect, while when he contemplates him in himself as being from that which woman is manifest, he beholds him in an active aspect. When, however, he contemplates him in himself without any regard to what has come from him, he beholds him as passive to himself directly. However, his contemplation of the reality in woman is the most complete and perfect, because in this way, he contemplates the reality in both active and passive mode, while by contemplating the reality only in himself, he beholds him in a passive mode, particularly, right? Because of this, the apostle loved women by reason of the possibility of perfect contemplation of the reality in them. Contemplation of the reality without formal support is not possible, since God in his essence is far beyond all need of the cosmos. Since therefore some form of support is necessary, the best and most perfect kind is the contemplation of God in women. In other words, the contemplation of God by the intellect in the universal nature, in the productions and the realities of universal nature, which means in the here and now, in the world right in front of us. The greatest union is that between man and woman, corresponding as it does to the turning of God toward the one he has created in his own image. So make him his vicegerent, so that he might behold himself in it. Accordingly, he shaped him, balanced him, and breathed his spirit into him, which is his breath, so that his outer aspect is creaturely, while his inner aspect is divine. Because of this, he describes it, the spirit, as being the disposer of this human structure by which God disposes of things from the heaven, which is elevation, to the earth, which is the lowest of the low, being the lowest of the elements. He calls them women, nisa, a word that has no singular form. The apostle therefore said, 3 things have been made beloved to me in this world, women and not woman in the singular, having regard to the fact that they came into being after him, the man, or the universal nature or soul coming after the universal intellect. Indeed, the word nus'a means coming after. He says the postponed month. Nasi is an increase in unbelief, as also selling by nasia, that is by postponement. Thus he says women, he loves them only because of their lower rank and their being this repository of passivity. Anybody who has followed everything that Ibn Arabi has said up to this point, this final chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, knows that he's not talking about literal gender because of what? Because of the very first verse of the Surah Al-Nisa, that God says it created everything as a nafsin wahidati. So we are not talking about the literal relationship between male and female. We're talking about the relationship between the hypostases. In relation to him, they are the universal nature is to God. Now he says it to us. in which he revealed the forms of the cosmos by directing toward it the divine will and command, which at the level of elemental form is symbolized by conjugal union, spiritual concentration in the realm of luminous spirits, and the ordering of premises toward a conclusion in the realm of thought, all of which correspond to the consummation of the primordial singularity in all these aspects. Whoever loves women in this way loves with a divine love, while he whose love for them is limited to natural lust lacks all true knowledge of that desire. For such a one, she's a mere form, devoid of spirit, and even though that form be indeed imbued with spirit, it is absent for the one who approaches his wife or some other woman solely to have his pleasure of her without realizing whose the pleasure really is. Thus, he does not know himself truly, just as a stranger does not know until he reveals his identity to him. As they say, they are right in supposing that I am in love, only they know not with whom I am in love. Such a man is really in love with pleasure itself, and in consequence loves its repository, which is woman, the real truth and meaning of the act being lost on him. If he knew the truth, he would know whom it is he is enjoying and who it is who is the enjoyer, when he would be perfected. Now, this is a very, very subtle point he's bringing. I mean, besides the very overtly tantric language and imagery that he's putting in front of us, what he's saying here, if you go back the last couple of paragraphs and then read this again, it becomes very evident that Ibn Arabi only now is introducing the concept of gender and the relationship between man and woman. Everything that he said previous to this is talking about the hypostational relationship between the intellect and the soul, or the nature. Just as woman ontologically is of lower rank than man, or the universal nature that is, according to his saying, men enjoy a rank above them. So also is the creature inferior in rank to the one who fashioned him in his image. This is being made in his image. But this creature is male and female, right? So this is the point. By virtue of the superiority by which he distinguished from him, he is above all need of the cosmos and is the primary agent, the form or image being an agent only in a secondary sense, since the image, man, does not have the primacy which belongs to God. Just a second. Okay, let me read that sentence again. By virtue of the superiority by which he is distinguished from him, he is above all need of the cosmos and is the primary agent, the form or image being an agent only in a secondary sense, since the image of humankind does not have the primacy which belongs to God. The eternal essences, the Ayana Thabita, are similarly distinguished according to their ranks, and the Gnostic allots to everything its proper due. Thus it is that Muhammad's love for women derives from the divine love, and because God gives to everything he has created, which is its due, essentially. He gives to them according to a merit fixed in the eternally predisposed essence of that which is deserving. He places women first because they are the repository of passivity, just as the universal nature, which now glosses the fact that this is what he's really talking about, by its form, comes before those things that derive their being from her. In reality, nature is the breath of the merciful. This is such an important point. I'll say it again. In reality, nature, at-tabiya, is the breath of the merciful, the nafas ar-rahmaniyah, in which are unfolded the forms, the higher and lower cosmos, because of their pervasion of the express birth in the primordial substance, particularly in the realm of the celestial bodies. Its flowing being different in respect of the existence of the luminous spirits and accidents. Then the apostle goes on to give precedence to the feminine over the masculine, and this is now gets very interesting. So it now unwinds all this misogynistic talk from before. Then the apostle goes on to give precedence to the feminine over the masculine, intending to convey thereby a special concern with the experience of women. Thus he says, thalas, 3 in the feminine case, and not thalatha, 3 in the masculine case, which is used for the numbering the masculine nouns. This is remarkable in that he also mentions perfume, tayyib, which is a masculine noun. And the Arabs usually make the masculine gender prevail. Thus, one says the Fatimas and Zaids went out using the third person masculine plural. Al-Fawatim wa Zaid kharaju. You don't say kharajna even though there are more women in the collective than the men. The Fatimas and the Zaid went out using the third person masculine plural and not the third person feminine plural. In this way, they give preference to the masculine noun, even if there's only one such noun together with the several feminine nouns. Now, although the apostle was an Arab, he is here giving special attention to the significance of the love enjoined upon him, seeing that he himself did not choose that love. It was God who taught him what he knew not, and God's bounty on him was abundant. He therefore gives precedence to the feminine over the masculine by saying, Thalath. How knowledgeable was the apostle concerning spiritual realities, and how great was his concern for proper precedence. And in the commentaries, especially the case study brings out something extremely interesting out when he points out that that essence is feminine, right? Insan is usually deemed as masculine, but then woman is the feminine as well. So between the insan occurs between two feminines, right? In the middle. At the beginning, at the end, the insan is the one that is in the middle, but at the beginning and the end, both are feminine. The women stand both above and below. Furthermore, he made the final term, prayer, correspond to the first, women, in the femininity, placing the masculine term, perfume, between them. He begins with women and ends with prayer, both of which are feminine nouns. The masculine noun, perfume, coming in between them, as is the case with its existential being, since man is placed between the essence, a feminine noun, from which he is manifested, and woman who is manifested from him. Thus, he is between two feminine entities, the one substantively feminine, the other feminine in reality, women being feminine in reality, while prayer is not. Perfume is placed between them as Adam is situated between the essence, which is the source of all existence, and Eve, whose existence stems from it, although the Quran would beg to differ. Other terms such as a sifa, attribute, and qutra, capability, are feminine. Indeed, whatever school of thought you adhere to, you will find feminine terms prominent. Even the causalists say that God is the cause, illa, of the cosmos, and illa is feminine. As for the wisdom of perfume and is putting it after women, it is because of the aromas of generation in women, the most delightful of perfumes being experienced within the embrace of the beloved, as they say in the well-known saying. And I'll leave it here for this week's reading, because next week we'll basically finish the rest of this. Now the floor is open to all of you for whatever you want to talk about. Who wants to go first? Come on, people.
I can go. So the way that you're reading the chapter really throws me off.
Okay.
Because it just takes the. I mean, you said there's the one paragraph where you think that's where he brings in actual gender.
Yeah.
So it is in there, but then the rest of it I'm reading as referring to actual gender. I mean, I have an issue with the kind of misogyny too, but but yeah, it throws off the way I read the rest of it. The whole thing about contemplation, especially like this shuhud of the reality in the form of a woman. I mean, I think it could be reversed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Easily,
and he says
so
that. He actually explicitly says this in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. This is why I'm saying that this particular chapter is extremely controversial to everybody, whether you're a detractor of Ibn Arabi or a enthusiast of Ibn Arabi. And it didn't make sense to me for the longest time until I went about 10 years ago and did a really careful reading of Futuhat again. And these things started jumping out at me because he is saying things, for example, he says that the highest secret name of the essence is Hiya, she. Then he says things that you know any Salik can contemplate God in the most beatific form in woman, right? That there is no, and then he gives these very, very tawil interpretation of like the verse, "Ar-rijalu qawwamun 'ala nisa," the men dominate over women, and some of these other verses gives completely reverse meanings. He does exactly the same thing in the Futwa that he did in the chapter of Noah with those verses that he was citing. So once I kind of this like, aha, okay, I know what he's doing in this final chapter of the Fusus. He's not literally talking about gender. He's talking about this process. So we have to read the Rijal from this point forward as kind of a stand-in for the intellect, rather than simply for men. Because otherwise, if we read it literally, this reads like a real, crass, misogynistic analysis. And given that Ibn Arabi's three of his teachers were women, especially that Fatima of Cordoba, who he absolutely adored this woman, what he says about her in his Dura al-Fakhira, his reminiscence of the Sufis of Andalusia, it just doesn't make any sense because he was elevating her station above most of the men of her era in Andalusia. He was saying, this woman was a Pole, and things like that. So when he makes statements like that, and then when he becomes really elusive on this whole issue of gender and reverses all of these registers in the Futuhat, that is the only conclusion one can come to in regarding this last chapter of the Fusus al-Hikam, that he's not talking about gender, not material gender. He's talking about metaphysical gender and the relationship between the intellect and the soul.
So, okay, so I think we could still, so if we reverse it, then we could maybe still read the rest of it in a similar way, where it's like, or at least the part that I'm concerned with is the part about the contemplation of the reality in the perfect form. That part, it seems it could, the whole like woman deriving from man,
Yeah.
that seems harder to reverse because then you would have to say man derives from woman. It's like
Yeah.
that seems like
Yeah.
it's not
But
reversible.
that whole narrative of woman deriving from man is actually, well, I mean, in Shiism, the Imams outright reject that narrative. They say it's nonsense, that they're equals, that God created both Adam and Eve equally. Eve did not derive from Adam's rib. This is all rejected by our sources. But implicitly, it's also rejected via the first verse of Surah An-Nisa itself. God creates humanity as a sizik, right? And then separates them. It doesn't give it precedence over which separation comes first. It just separates them into men and women and then into tribes and people and disperses them onto land in order for them to know each other. That's the Quranic metaphysics. So, for Ibn Arabi to say that makes no sense if one is reading it literally, because he knows this. He knows the Quran better than anybody. And he knows that there's no precedence being put between when these genders are separated. And it's not an issue of one coming after the other. So then what else must be going on here? And why is he phrasing these things in such a way? And that's a whole discussion that is quite interesting. But he's doing this, I think, very deliberately to put people off, also to placate his detractors on one hand, but also to get you to really search the meaning of what he's trying to say, about the process of things rather than the literal materialization of things. Because if you take it from that exoteric point of view, the whole argument, in a sense, of the whole book just collapses in a heap. Never mind all the other things that he had said previous to that before the Fusus.
Okay, that makes sense. But so I'm still really interested in the kind of tantric aspect of it, and just focusing on that part about contemplation. One question that always comes up for me is, so the reason it's the perfect contemplation is because, let me just read that. So his man's contemplation of the reality in woman, and we could reverse that, I think. Woman's contemplation of the reality in man is the most complete and perfect, because in this way they contemplate the reality in both active and passive mode. So that goes both ways too. If the man is active and passive in relation to the woman, then the woman will be passive and active
In relation
correspondingly.
and vice
In
versa.
relation,
Yeah.
yeah. And so one question that always comes up, I don't think he clarifies, is in what sense is the man active and the woman passive? In what sense is the woman active and the man passive?
He never answers this directly, and that is why I think this is one of the clues I got about 10 years ago, that you have to discard the whole material gender argument around this, because if you then try to follow this logic that you just pointed out, it doesn't, first of all, he never answers it, and number two, it gets contradictory rather than kind of revealing, the kind of thing that I'm trying to point out here. I took it completely different. I used a lot of the symbolism and the arguments implied in what Ibn Arabi is trying to do in both the first chapter and the last chapter, and just basically completely reversed the registered, and then brought things back in a kind of a sort of a, not a Wittgensteinian language game, but a language game that I used in reversing the precedence between these things. But I did it from this point of view. Rather than take the word nisa, I took the word mirat itself. That is also named for woman. But one vowel, right, in that construction of mirat changes the meaning of the word from woman to mirror, right? So marat and mirat are both spelled the same, but one vowel makes one the female, the other one makes it the mirror. And so then when you play on this, right, then this relationship of perfect contemplation begins to make a lot more sense, that what Ibn Arabi is trying really hard to point out to us, because this is the mirror relationship. And so then the issue of contemplation and the passivity and activity in the contemplation becomes a very interestingly profound dialectic as to who is active and who is passive in this process of contemplation. And what does the contemplate, or what does the reflection itself then constitute in this process of activity and passivity, right? And depending on which perspective you're standing on, or which standpoint you're on, this activity passivity takes on its own kind of dynamic. So on one level, it is a passive, and on another level, it is active. The contemplator can be God at one point, but it can also be passive as God at the same time, contemplating itself, and on these kinds of this kind of imagery goes. So that's what I played on, and then in the very first chapter of Eve, of my own effulgences of wisdom, I played on that, and that was from years of just trying to get my head around this very kind of paradox that you just pointed your finger on. That is why whoever has ever come to me about the Fusus, complaining about, why is Ibn Arabi becoming a misogynist in this final chapter? It's like, wait a minute. That's not what is going on. He's playing a trick on us. And here's the reasons why. So what I recognize is, okay, well, since this is the case, so now let's exposit this situation in a lot more clearer way. And rather than use the word nisa, use the word mirat instead, given this dual meaning between woman and mirror.
Mm. Okay.
Which incidentally is the same word that he uses in the very first chapter. He uses marat in the first chapter
Yeah.
when he's talking about the relationship of the locus as the mirror, right? That's the word he uses. He's not using the sun.
The way that I've always thought about it is, at least partly, I think it's Isari's commentary, where the way he glosses it is to say that the action of the woman on the man is the creation of love in the man's heart.
Yeah.
Right. So the man sees the beauty of the woman, and that is a kind of action on the man that he becomes enraptured. And we could reverse that too.
We can reverse that.
Um,
But remember, now just remember this. What he said in the last chapter, in the chapter of Moses about the infant, right, who subjugates the adult, right? We can take that in that same relationship in the relationship of the man who falls in love with the woman, such that then, just as he said about the baby, because of its infancy being closer to God, we can say the same thing about the woman who enchants a man. That divine, the seductress, that sort of thing, is exercising a divine power, right? So in that respect, that principle is also then closer to God in relation to the man who has been enchanted. So that also abides. That also suffices in this argument.
yeah, and also the annihilation, that
Yeah.
the man is annihilated, so that there would be a majesty on the side of the woman
Yeah.
in that case.
Yeah. So the man
So
would
what I was
the man would be the passive
mm,
in this respect, just as the adult was the passive in the relationship to the baby.
right. So then what I was thinking of, how I was thinking about it was, as a just in terms of the dialectic, it's like just in terms of a process. If it starts with one person falling in love, or both people falling in love, then it's just interesting to me to think about the process of that in general, just like the phenomena, just the experience of falling in love, and how it can lead to, like, it leads to something else. It leads to an activity, even though it sometimes starts off as a passion. It grows into like an activity where now you love the person. You're not just in love with the person, and then they respond to that by falling in love. Or like Plato talks about this in the Phaedrus, where he talks about, there it's in the context of like Greek pederasty, but there's the boy who the old man falls in love with, but eventually the boy falls in love with the man, right? He calls it eros and anteros,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you can actually love someone into loving you back. Um, it just seems it works when it's this kind of divine love, when
Yeah.
the principle behind the whole thing is a single principle that's animating both people. That's what I think lets the dialectic unfold.
I agree. But I think the ultimate, you know, the ultimate that Plato himself shows us in the Symposium is the relationship between Socrates and Diotima. And because she's literally the goddess, Athena embodied at that point when she's discoursing. It's never mentioned this. Proclus is the only one that actually ever says this. That at that point, when this whole conversation between her and Socrates and what she's revealing to him and what she's saying to him, it's really the goddess, it's herself, embodied in this woman, talking, having this conversation with Socrates, revealing the mysteries of love to him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That was just
Yeah.
some thoughts I had.
Yeah.
I think this would be a good follow-up. The same idea that Sheikh Suhrawardi says that the whole being, it is just two powers in play, the beauty and the love, which are the love constantly going after the beauty. Here, the same idea.
Yeah.
If we put the beauty in women, then the beauty is the active part, and the love is what constantly goes after the beauty.
Yeah. Same thing. Basically the same thing. Yeah. Just different categories of expression, but it's based there. Silverati's essentially saying exactly the same thing. Yeah. This is from the Munas al-Ushaq, one of his treatises which I really love very much. Suhrawardi's treatise on the reality of love. Yeah, we've got the ish. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one or more questions. The first one here, when the Sheikh says that let's say, in some sense, our souls, they have the nature of fire because they are kind of a result of the four elements. And one or two sentences after that, he says, if we were of Tabir, then our souls would have the nature of light.
Yeah.
So here, what I cannot understand, isn't it that the Tabir and the four elements are more or less the same thing?
Not the same. Well, they're obviously they are, they are emanations of the productions of the primary productions of the universal nature. But they're not, they are the same thing insofar as they derive from the primary substrate of the universal nature, but they're distinguished in terms of being what they are, each of them. So fire is fire, air is air, water is water, and earth is earth. But yes, in their substrate, in their ultimate source, they are the same thing. Elemental. Unsuri.
Okay, and the next one, just to find it. When the Sheikh is saying what is the difference between the one whose love for women, or let's say whose passion for women is result for that he sees the divine manifestation in them, and the other one whose passion for women is just a passion,
Yeah,
who
lust.
doesn't
Yeah, the fleshy, lusty kind of passion versus the spiritualized, lusty, or the spiritualized kind of passion. Um, the what he's basic. I mean, it's a very apropos criticism because it's very much a prevalent attitude in our times at the moment. Is that when you're materializing women, right, and just looking at them as an object of material lust, right, that is gratified and then you're satiated and you don't have that anymore. He's saying you don't get it, right? Lust as passion is Hawa. What did we say about Hawa 2 chapters ago, right? That is a divine impulse itself, right? So what he's saying is that until you realize what that object really represents, that it is a theophany, that the passion that you feel for women, even in the erotic passion that you feel for a member of the opposite sex, or if you're not, or if you're even gay, that what if you feel that behind that is that divine impulse itself, it's God. So in other words, eros is a theophany. Just as agape is a theophany, philia is a theophany, everything else is a theophany, but this is a real passionate, that manifestation of the Hawa that we were talking about, or the Hawa that we were talking about before, 2 chapters ago. This is it, right? This is how it manifests in the real material world. And I find the imagery extremely profound when we transpose the male-female basic material thing to intellect and soul. This becomes especially profound when you contemplate on the annihilation of the intellect in the universal nature, right? This becomes an extremely profound symbol that the higher principle annihilates itself into its own production. in a sense, right? And what is the result of that? The result of that is, at least in instances of it, it becomes number one world, but in other instances of it, we get the insan kamil. So when the intellect, the man has annihilated truly in the woman, knowing the woman to be the object, the perfect object of contemplation, when the intellect has realized that universal nature is itself, and it's the mirror to God, to what it longs for, to use that Ismaili language, the first intellect longing for its first principle, when that annihilation, when we even take that imagery of annihilation in relation to the intellect and the soul, this becomes profound, becomes very active, passionate, really, it takes it out of that very dry and kind of lifeless, normal way that philosophers kind of talk about the relationship of God to.
Okay, thank you very much, Saidi.
Welcome. Yeah.
I just like to comment on the word misogyny. I find it hilarious that the whole misogynistic angle keeps cropping up. Like anytime you, I don't even know how to formulate my thoughts on this. I just find it funny, and I just wanted to challenge anyone who might be listening. Like, I don't know, like you said, let's not take everything too seriously, and let's not try to see, literal sequences of events in
Well,
a spatial temporal
we,
context. Because
we have to reiterate the fact that this is an esoteric text, right?
exactly, yeah,
And not everything is as it seems. And Ibn Arabi is very well known for this, that he will say something, whether in this text or especially in his poetry, he will say something and someone will look at it, well, it's like he's saying this. But then like 2 lines later, he will say something that completely contradicts what he was saying, 2 lines before. So this is how you have to read Ibn Arabi. He's a Sufi. He's writing primarily for an esoteric audience. He knows that his works are being published. He also understands that if he says things too openly, that they will be even more misunderstood so he's phrasing things sometimes in a very deliberate way, but then a couple of lines down or a paragraph or two down, then he will bang, throw the truth at you, or at least a glimpse of it, and then let you work out what he was meaning, a couple of lines above or a couple of paragraphs before, right? So this whole thing about misogyny just makes no sense in the worldview of Ibn Arabi. You can't accuse him of that, and especially if you've read, his real magnum opus, the Meccan Revelations. Then some of the things that he says about women, you would think that this man was a pagan, practically. So this is where you got to exercise discernment in how you read him, and then this is why one must pay attention through this text at all times in everything he's saying, because he will say something in one chapter or in one line, and then a couple of chapters down the line or a couple of lines or paragraphs later, he will come back and clarify what he meant in that previous line. This is a well-known literary tactic known in Imami hadith, where the imams will, for example, be talking about fiqh, jurisprudence, and all of a sudden they switch from talking about a point of fiqh in the same line to an issue related to mystical wayfaring. And you're like, what happened? This was supposedly they were supposed to talk about jurisprudence. Why is he suddenly talking about the nature of the wayfarer? And then several hadiths later in a few other books down the line in Khomeini, the same point will then be resolved or addressed, finally, that point of jurisprudence on a point of theology. Okay? This is a tactic known as dispersal of knowledge. And it's a very classic esoteric tactic, literary tactic, for the sole purpose is that those who are serious will seek that knowledge out in that corpus, and then bring the puzzle back together again for themselves, rather than to rely on kind of a didactic, step by step by step. This is not how esoteric writing works.
No, you have to be very patient and you have to pay attention and you can't be quick to jump all
No,
the time on things like, oh my God, what
yeah,
and
yeah,
like I
yeah.
find that anyone who even would see misogyny there, in my opinion, is not qualified to be reading the text
Well,
because,
I
that's
agree. I agree. But we also have to put this out there that he does not mean what he says, and what he's
yeah.
saying means something completely different than what he's saying. So we have to emphasize this point because even like I mentioned with some of these commentators, um, on many of these points, one of these sorts of points, like the one I just pointed out, there are various conflicts of interpretation, right? So case study will say one thing, and then his like teacher has said something else, and his teacher before him has said something completely different. So what what I resolved with Ibn Arabi is that one cannot even rely on the commentators. That you gotta take him almost as a teacher that is leading you step by step, hoping that you figure out, what he's trying to lead you, what kind of truth that he's trying to lead you to. So don't take anything for granted. This is also a attitude that one should have in the path in general, not to take anything for granted, because the minute you do, you've lost the plot. And this is where I think in misinterpretations of Ibn Arabi, even among some of his most enthusiastic, gushing followers, has happened. The minute they think they have figured him out, right? They haven't figured him out.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say quickly too, like the as with esotericism in general, you're going to the work is riddled with paradoxes all over the place.
Yep.
So, like you mentioned earlier already, and so I think that's one way for people to avoid falling into the whole you know hierarchical trap in the
Yeah.
world, like
Yeah.
who's got the precedence? Is it man is above woman, woman is above man, and trying to figure out who's the superior being amongst beings instead of falling into that trap, because it is a trap. We just need to understand that the whole thing is a paradox. And it's like, I don't know if you in the West, obviously, it's a very famous paradox, the chicken and the egg. I mean,
Yeah.
you just ask yourself who came first, and there's no satisfactory answer to that question. You have to just accept at some point that, well, they're on the same level, and there is no precedence, chicken or egg, egg or chicken. So I
Well, I
mean,
mean, that's why I said if since the master text of Ibn Arabi is the Quran, the Quran has already settled the matter. That this whole thing about inferior, superior is just a non-starter. God creates the one soul, and out of the soul makes that seismic separation between male and female, and then out of this comes humanity. So there's no inferior, superior at all going on. Then once you get into the Imami Hadith, and this whole narrative of Adam and Eve comes up, I mean, the Imams just outright reject this whole rib story. This is nonsense.
yeah.
Ali alayhi salam outside, just like says that this is beneath the grandeur of God, to create the female from the rib of its first creation. You cannot take this literally. This is we reject this. Yeah.
Mhm. And okay, and I had just one other point. I found it interesting when you were talking about the two femininities, the
Mm.
femininity above and the femininity below, and the man in between the two. It just reminded me of the concept of two waters, the how
Yeah.
you have the waters above and the waters below.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but that image just came really sharp into my mind
Because
when you
it's
were
it's it,
that.
it it's a congruent piece of symbolism in this,
Yeah,
reflecting on what Ibn Arabi is saying.
right.
The waters above and the waters below. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess finally I do have one more thought. I'm thinking there are some analogies, though, I think, between the cosmic principles and manifest
Sure.
things in the world, so that when we think
Absolutely.
of the feminine principle and then we think of an actual physical woman, I mean, obviously there's an analogy there. And so there's another point to the confusion is despite all the paradox, there is also correspondence and analogy that so there's a whole bunch of things going on at once, and
Yes.
which is again why it's so fundamentally important to remain open-minded and patient and try to dig deep and not jump to conclusions.
100%. This is why with a figure like Ibn Arabi, even though this is, the Fusus is a epitome of his thought, yet that's not the only thing he wrote. I mean, the man is credited for over 500 pieces of writing, and his magnum opus is over 500 chapters. And that is where you really find what Ibn Arabi thinks about a lot of things, in detail. And even there, I mean, there's a lot of paradox and aporia and all of that stuff is happening in Futuhat as well. But if you know the Futuhat al-Makkiyah and what he says about women in it, then you know that what he's saying in here is not literal. Don't get, because people have. I mean, I've recommended this, and people have gone and read it and then come back right as they've started the final chapter, and they're just incensed, but really angry about why is he, this is misogyny. And I set them as like, sit out, let me say a few things to you here before you can pop a nerve. So
yeah, don't get upset.
don't get upset.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Sure. Good. Anybody else? Riaz, Zachariah, you're around?
Oh yeah, I've got a couple of questions. So in Jungian psychology, there's a whole idea of what happens when you're infatuated. The idea is that if you're infatuated with a woman, something to do with like your or if you're infatuated with a man, it's with this inner sort of feminine principle, this inner sort of masculine principle. So the way to dissociate yourself from your lust is to sort of indulge whatever this inner principle is. I was wondering what that looks like in the Akbarian theophany, I suppose, because things are more externally manifested. They accept that more.
Yeah, well, Ibn Arabi basically put his finger on how that is done is to understand that what the presence behind it is, that passion, that inner woman, inner man, ultimately these are manifestations of God, right? And not just in the object that you're contemplating, but your very feeling, right? So it's not just the case that, right, the object in front of me is a theophany, your feeling in the matter is also a theophany. And so there's in the way that Ibn Arabi himself discusses it, there's a qabil maqbul, the container and that which is contained, dynamic going on. And these are all the tajallis. These are all, this whole thing is a self-disclosure. And so when an individual gets into a infatuation, a couple of Muslims that have come to me for counseling over this sort of stuff, I've had to really, get them to understand this concept of tajalli itself, that, the process that you're going through, all of this stuff, this is a very sacred thing that is happening with you. You shouldn't take it for granted and just simply, curse the world for the fact that, you're not, your love isn't being responded to, or that you're feeling disempowered. This is a sacred event, that this is going on. This is God working through you and through the other person simultaneously. And then once you superimpose these, Jungian and cognitive, categories into the mix, I think it explains the situation, details it a lot better at the same time. So then people have the best of both worlds of trying to understand their own state in the situation.
Cool. And next two questions. One of them's administrative, and the other one's maybe a bit different. What are some other like books or thinkers that also go into this sort of stuff? Like you mentioned how there's resonations here with tantric philosophy. So if you had any other.
In Islam or just generally across the board?
Let's say in Islam. Yeah, in Islam.
In Islam, basically the entire Sufi tradition from Ibn Arabi up to now has been dealing with this issue. Sachiko Murata wrote this excellent book called The Tao of Islam. And she explores this stuff a little bit more, and from a variety of different authors. She's William Chittick's wife. So that's an amazingly good book. I think that the subtitle is a source book on gender relationships in Islam. The Tao of Islam. It's a very, very good book. And she wrote that and published that book right at the beginning of the 1990s when a lot of this, neo-feminist discourse was already starting to come into the fore. And interesting enough, on the one hand, she was trying to kind of push back against some of the more radical things that some of these writers were saying. But by the same token, her ideas in the Tao of Islam then kind of flowed into the discourses of a lot of feminists after that. So now you see a lot of works on feminist theory that are quoting Sachika Murata, and that book in particular. So that's a book to look at in translation. I mean, I have come across tons upon tons of Chishti texts on alchemy and Tantra, and these are the Chishti Sufi order of India, of the subcontinent, where they're engaging outright with Kundalini and the whole Tantric Kundalini metaphysics. Karl Ernst wrote a whole book and did a couple of different translations on this stuff, which is really, really good stuff. There's a lot. There is really, I mean, to even begin to give you a tally, I don't know where to begin. But this has been a preoccupation of this tradition pretty consistently from the 13th century to pretty much now. This whole question.
Sorry, what was the last name you mentioned?
Ernst. Karl Ernst. E-R-N-S-T.
Carl?
Karl. C-A-R-L. Karl Ernst. E-R-N-S-T.
Okay, cool. And I was wondering, I think you mentioned this earlier. So once this course is done, which will be in, pretty shortly, what will you be doing with whatever you're uploading right now? Will you keep it on your YouTube? Will you archive it?
Yeah, everything will stay. The Telegram group will change its name to the Mulasadra group because we're going to start doing the Wisdom of the Throne as of mid-January, and together with Sapsivari's commentary on the philosophical poem. But everything will stay on the Telegram page, and that's it.
Cool, thanks.
Sure thing. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry, you forgot to mention your own work.
Which one?
When I asked you that question, the Effulgences of Wisdom, isn't that also?
I think I already uploaded that to the Telegram page. But
I know, but you didn't mention it when I asked about other works.
Yeah, it's there. I'll give it to you again. Okay. I'll upload it again. Yeah.
Okay, no, I saw it there. I just, thought it would be funny to mention.
No worries. Anybody else? No questions? Okay.
Sheikh, last one.
Go ahead.
So here, when we speak about the dynamics between the universal soul and the universal intellect, if we translate it, let's say that we, with our partial intellects and partial soul, what it tells about ourselves as a human being who have the same two aspects in ourselves and the process between them internally in us.
It tells us a lot. It tells us that as an internal process of the inner male and female within each person, right, irrespective of their material gender, it says a lot. Because it means, especially in that particular part where it's talking about the annihilation of the man and the woman, and if you take that as the annihilation of your inner man within your inner woman, right, this is totally alchemical. That means that you're basically in the process of creating the antimony of the stone of itself, right? The two polar opposites that become one, that then produce the androgyny within yourself, which is the stone, which is the philosopher's stone. It says a lot. This is, I mean, the stuff that Ibn Arabi puts in this final chapter, when I think interpreted in the way that it's meant to be interpreted, offers a extremely rich, arsenal of symbolism to deal even with one's own psychology. it's the sky's the limit in what you can do. And if you have any knowledge of the alchemical tradition, whether in Islam or in the West, you could use that to that end. This is why I think, I think these individuals like Jordan Peterson, who style themselves as Jungians, would benefit tremendously in their own practice from the reading of Ibn Arabi, rather than going, and jumping into evangelical exoteric Christian bandwagon, which I don't understand, because he's a Jungian. He's not a he's coming from a school of depth, that takes esotericism and gnosis for granted as being the way to understand all of these issues, rather than what exoteric religion in the church is saying. Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot that you can unpack from this. Yeah.
Just in defense of Jordan Peterson, I think he goes a lot deeper. He's doing his best to try to like formulate all of this for a mass audience,
don't
a
know.
mass market. I'm not sure exactly if that's a good idea. Well, I don't know if it's a good idea, but
I tend to look at Jordan Peterson as being an algorithmic grift. He's taking his own hype a little bit too seriously. I mean, he could do a lot more good if he drops this, kind of Christian literalist spiel that he's been on lately, together with the whole, what he calls the anti-woke bandwagon that he's on. Yeah, he's an influencer, but I mean, look, in this particular time we're living in, to be an influencer isn't saying much, because we're in a time of idiocracy, where the stupidest are leading. Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Jordan Peterson is an educated man. I understand his frustration with the nature of the times, but his conclusion about the nature of the times, in my opinion, is completely wrong.
Well, it might surprise you to know that I think he's totally in harmony with your appraisal of the situation. And I think he's doing in the future going to attempt to do what you're doing with the post-Islamic paradigm, in the form of, Azali Babism. He's where you have Azali Babism to work with and to develop. He has nothing. All he knows is that it's a post-Christian paradigm that he's working with, but he doesn't have the benefit, and neither do I, that you have with.
Here's the question. He does actually. There's a very rich tradition of Christian esotericism and Christian mysticism, an extremely deep tradition too. I mean, we don't even have to go into the early period. I mean, during the Renaissance, afterwards, there's a rich tradition of Christian esoteric alchemy, where all of this stuff in the New Testament becomes a kind of an alchemical text. And someone like Peterson, coming from the Jungian approach that he's coming from, he already knows this stuff. I mean, Jung talks about this stuff in his studies. So, in my opinion, rather than pigeonhole yourself amongst a certain crowd of people for a political purpose and become a kind of a poster boy for the Republican Party in the United States and the right in Canada, he can do a lot more good for the greater good beyond, the polarities of the time, and just start talking about, Angelus Silesius, start talking about Meister Eckhart, start talking about some of the Christian female mystics like Marguerite Poré or so many of these great, Christian female mystics and whatnot. I don't know what he's doing, because he's
well, no, nobody does.
I don't think he does either. To tell you the truth.
I don't mean nobody knows what he's doing. I mean, nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
In terms of trying to develop a new way forward, that is to say, because I think most people agree that there does need to be a new way forward, but I don't think anybody knows how to approach it, except for you, because you have a unique point of departure, where the rest of us, that's what I meant by you have a benefit there. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, outside of the world of the Islamic milieu, where you can emerge as with the post-Islamic, um,
And just before we
future.
go on, the way that I have defined post-Islamic is in the same way that modernity gets juxtaposed with post-modernity. It's not outside of it.
No,
It's
yeah.
part of it. It's its transformation, or to use that great term from biology that alchemy also uses, palingenesis, right? This is such
Right.
an amazing term, palingenesis, transformation of things in their
Right.
inherent nature, just like a worm becomes a butterfly. That's his palingenesis. That's the relationship between Islam and post-Islam. I mean, what we're witnessing right now in the Islamic world is a breakdown of everything. And over the last 150 years, all we have seen is this incessant fracturing into these very lockjawed, fundamentalist, exoteric narratives. Whereas 150 years ago, Sufism was still the normative form of Islam, at least in most of the Sunni world. And within the Shia world, the esoteric discourses had pretty much won out at that time. Now it's, especially the last 100 years, everything has gone in the opposite direction. And then you see this fragmentation. And then you have empire that wants to pit everybody against everybody else, as a divide and conquer rule. And it's just this, this flight to nowhere, this runaway train that is destroying all life,
Yeah.
rather than creating life, it is destroying life. The reverse Midas touch. And this needs to change. I mean, we need public intellectuals. This is why I don't take, right now, until he proves me differently, I don't take Jordan Peterson seriously until he makes that turn and comes out, as a champion of this kind of a perspective, because he should know better. Right now, he's kind of hanging out with the evangelicals, but yet people have doubts about Jordan Peterson himself as to whether he even believes in the existence of God. And the question for me is that why is that even something that is needed to be debated with someone like Jordan Peterson? Does he have doubts about the existence of God? And if he has doubts about the existence of God, then this says that there's somewhere within him, in his own suluk, that he is kind of stuck. He's gotten stuck. Whereas if he immersed himself exclusively in this world of Christian esotericism, I don't have a problem with any of that stuff. I love that stuff to pieces. But if he just threw himself wholesale into that world, he would come out the other end, even looking at a lot of the political issues that he's been expressing very differently. I don't know. Maybe he's afraid of it. I don't know. But a true cognitive psychologist of the caliber that Jordan Peterson needs to be has no doubt about this question, because God is being at that point. That everything around you is in God. You see it, right? Even in the polar dialectics and opposites and oppositional thing, God is still present in all of that simultaneously. He's not there. At least he's not articulating himself as being there yet.
No.
I mean,
And
in that debate, what was it? He had that debate with Richard Dawkins, who I think is just a philosophical imbecile. He might be a great scientist, but Dawkins is an imbecile from the point of view of as a philosopher. He's not a philosopher.
yeah, no, he is an imbecile. I just want to say that this whole thing that we're discussing right now is actually a work in progress for everyone involved, including myself. And it's very, very, very fast paced. So don't jump to any conclusions yourself, because whatever things might have looked like yesterday might look very different tomorrow. So, everything's in progress,
I
and it's a
understand.
work.
I understand.
So
Things
that's my defense from my side of the world anyway. Not that I have any need to defend anybody or anything, but yeah, I think we all have to be a little bit patient and give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove definitively that there's no hope. But
Well,
anyway, that's all.
I don't have a right-wing bone in my body, and this brolarchy that Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and Dana White and you
Yeah.
know, Elon Musk and all of that crowd are part of. It's just, I look at this as both a circus, and as, it's like, is this the best that we can do at this point in the 21st century? We have
What
all
if
this wealth
it
of
is?
knowledge, and this is the best we can do.
Oh my God, it might be. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I mean, everybody seems to agree that that the world is on the precipice, and that
Yeah.
the biblical, of the biblical notion of an apocalyptic scenario is I
Is in
think
front of us. Yeah.
I think everybody now at this
Yeah.
point is seeing it right in front of them, and
Yeah.
so at least I don't know where we all go from here, but at least there's that, anyways. So
Well, I mean,
for whatever that's worth.
I've said this again and again and again. The Lord of the universe has put two options in front of humanity. The constructive path where we make a better world, or the destructive path where we destroy ourselves completely. Choose. But here's the thing. This isn't just about humanity anymore. It's not about humanity, because we are now at a place where if we destroy ourselves, we're not just destroying our own species, we're destroying everything else here. And that is that's a real problem. And the conundrums and the moral blame on that level of things is beyond just one species annihilating itself, or like the dinosaurs disappearing because a meteor hits the earth. It's the scale of this is much bigger.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Anywho, let's finish the last half of this chapter of Muhammad and come back next week, next time, same time, which will basically be our final session for this text. So anyway, until next time, ya fardu.